Michael Vaughan is a big part of Fox Cricket. He's also a former England captain, made 18 test tons, and he joins us now. Welcome, Vaughnie.
Morning. You all okay?
Yeah, going well, Vaughnie. Let's start with this England result over New Zealand. It was some sort of performance in the end, wasn't it? Especially given New Zealand's win over India in the test series just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, on the back of Ben Stokes winning the toss bowling, the Kiwis getting to 350 and England being 70 odd for 4, you thought, oh, hello, this batting lineup might crumble. But with Harry Brook and Ollie Pope, that partnership kind of got England back into the game. And then obviously see the captain score a few runs, a few tail-ender runs from Gus Atkinson and Bryden Cast. But Harry Brook is he's a special player. You know, to score the runs that he has done, he's got 7 tons now in 22 games. His average overseas is just below Don Bradman. So when you start kind of getting talked in the same sense of Don Bradman, you know you do something very, very special. He's a wonderful talent. And I think the most impressive thing is the way that England have found a way of getting 20 wickets overseas. I mean, you know, the last 2 or 3 years, every time they've got on the road, they've not won every game, but they've managed to find a way of getting 20 wickets. And that's down to the captaincy and the tactics and out of the box thinking. And in Bryden Cast, I think they've got a cricketer that's, you know, particularly these parts of the world with the Kookaburra ball, he's aggressive, he's quick, and he changes his kind of tactics quite nicely. So, yeah, a good week for English cricket.
How good do you think Harry Brook can be? He's 25 years old. He averages 60 in Test cricket, as you said. A fantastic average away from home as well. Could he be a big part of the next generation? You know, if we've got Kohli, Smith, Williamson, and Root as sort of part of this generation, can Brook be the next iteration of that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you look at Jaiswal as well for India. He's certainly in that bracket as well. You know, I look at Harry Brook and he's got all the time in the world. He triggers early, stays really still. And when you look at a player and the kind of tactics that you have to go to, it's almost a negative tactic to bore him out. So you bowl wide of off stump to him. The Kiwis dropped him a few times. So, you know, they catch him at first, slip on 40 odd, and the week may have been different. But when you're thinking of a tactic to get someone out and it's quite a negative tactic, you know that you're dealing with quite a special player. He scores so quickly. He latches onto anything short. I guess the only area of his game that he struggled with is when the ball's spun. You know, in India and in Pakistan, when the ball's spun sharply, he has an area that I think you can attack him with. But, you know, in these parts of the world, the southern hemisphere, New Zealand, Australia, the ball doesn't spin a great deal, and the seam doesn't kind of come into play a huge amount. I know it did in Perth in that first test match, but the ball doesn't whip around like it does in the UK. So he can just throw his hands through the ball and through length. Very, very difficult to keep quiet. And I think, I think he's going to be certainly a part of that next generation of real quality players.
So Bryden Cast is 29 years old. His first class record isn't actually that good in England, but he's taken 10 wickets in a match here. So James Anderson and Stuart Broad never did this across their away career for England. It seems to me like if you pick horses for courses, Cast is going to be a big part of the Ashes next summer if he stays fit.
Oh, without any question. And then you throw into the mix Gus Atkinson, and not only are they decent bowlers with a bit of gas, you know, they get vital runs down the bottom end. You know, they can whack a ball out the ground, which is so important. Well, if England's kind of cavalry of quick bowlers are fit for next year's Ashes, it's going to be a real contest. If Mark Wood's fit, Jofra Archer, Ollie Stone, Tong, then you go obviously Bryden Carson and Gus Atkinson who are playing now. If all that barrage of quick bowlers are fit, I think England will find a way of getting 20 wickets. Then it'll come down to the batters. Can they face the likes of Stark and Coe and Hazelwood and Cummings on these pitches and get a decent score? From what I see with the way that they play, I think they will. I think this batting line that England has, you know, you look at the last time they went to New Zealand against the Kookaburra ball in these conditions, they got a lot of runs, dominated the series, but they didn't enforce the follow-on and ended up losing the test match, but should have won that test series quite comfortably. And obviously they've gone 1-0 up here. They look like they're a team that plays well against the Kookaburra ball. So I know Australia wouldn't take this England side lightly because of the last Ashes series, the last 3 test matches. And you could argue for the most part of the first 2 test matches, England dominated that series. I think Australia will know that in a year's time they're in for a contest.
Just before we talk about Australia and India, did you see Sri Lanka get bundled out for 42 against South Africa in Durban? I mean, it was an hour of absolute mayhem.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a bit of that. We just seem to be in an era where, you know, we do see teams get blown away quite quickly. Look at the Australians and India in that first day at Perth. 150, 104, bowled out. England have been bowled out quickly in India on a few occasions, in Pakistan as well. There are some quality bowlers around the world, and also I think there's a bit of spice in some of these pitches. Whether it's a dusty one in Pakistan or India, or you get to Durban and it zips around, and you get a quality bowler like Jansen who suddenly gets it right. It's not easy to survive against these bowlers. I actually don't think we speak up, openly enough about the quality of the bowlers in this era. We always look back to the 80s and the 90s and think that the bowling back then was better. Now, I've watched Test cricket over the last few years. I think some of these attacks around the world are real high class, and that's why some of the numbers aren't quite as high as they used to be.
13.5 overs is all it took for the Proteas to bowl out Sri Lanka. We're talking to Michael Vaughan from Fox Cricket. How concerned are you about the Australian 11 ahead of Adelaide?
I have no concerns. I'm English.
How worrying should be for Australians, do you think?
I think if you lose Hazelwood, it is a big loss. But if you're ever going to replace him, I think Boland's a perfect replacement with a pink ball. The one concern I'd have about Boland is that he's not been playing any cricket. So, how fit is he in terms of match fitness? We'll have to wait and see. But the batting is a concern. The numbers in the last 8 Test matches tell you everything. That this batting lineup are just not scoring consistent runs, and there's a number of them out of form, out of kind of mind. You're looking at someone like Marnus, who didn't get any runs in Perth. He struggled of late. He got 90 in a Test match in New Zealand, but it's not the Marnus of 3 or 4 years ago. So he's got to find a method of looking to score and being a bit more positive. I think we'll see that in Adelaide. I don't have any concerns for Steve Smith at 4. I think he'll be fine. He got a good couple of balls in Perth, but I think his movements are fine and he'll score runs. And clearly at the top of the order, I think India will fancy getting Australia a couple down quickly. I mean, Husband's a wonderful player and has been for a number of years, but he's 38, and then you've got a youngster opening the batting who doesn't open. So it's not easy. It was good to see Travis play well in Perth. He's a gun and a dasher. Mitchell Marsh clearly has got a problem with his body to bowl, but he has to play as a batter surely, because he's the one player that you watch and see of the last few Test matches and look like he's got some kind of control. And I thought number 7, Alex Carey, looks in decent touch. But for whatever reason, they just don't seem to be batting collectively as a unit. And that's something that they're going to have to try and get right in Adelaide. And we know the pink ball game, a lot of it relies on the toss. If Australia bat first, I think they'll be fine. If they bat in second and they have to face Bumrah under the lights first time out, it's not going to be easy, because they're up against, in my opinion, the best bowler in the world in Jasprit Bumrah. And I think by the time that he finishes his career, we may be talking about the best bowler that's ever played the game. I rate him that highly, so it's not going to be easy for Australia.
Is Marnus the right selection call if they go with him again in Adelaide, or would you be making a change?
No, I'd go again. I mean, I'm a big believer that once you start a series with a team, unless there's an injury or two, and you have to change your formation. Because of that, you make the call. But I believe you keep the same side for 2 or 3 games and give them a run and try and get them playing together. I mean, if you start swapping and changing the side, that can create a little bit more chaos in the batting unit. And we know Marnus is a good player, he's a quality act. I just want to see him, go out there to score runs and not look to survive. I think he's a better player when he's looking to be a bit more aggressive, and I think we'll see that from Marnus in Adelaide.
Vaughan, I'm a huge fan of yours, and I love how you're not afraid to call it as it is, or call a spade, to use an Australianism. And you were honest and forthright regarding Josh Hazlewood's comments during the first Test. Do you believe this Australian team is losing whatever aura it had? I mean, it's been relatively successful over the journey, World Test Championship, retained Ashes away twice, but they haven't beaten India in 10 years. Like, how do you rank this Australian team when you compare it to all-time great teams of the past? Is it even in the conversation?
Oh, I think the bowling attack is, without any question. That quartet of bowlers are up there with the best, but the batting's nowhere near. And I think that's where teams can really target this Australian batting lineup. And, if you can bowl them out quickly, which India did in that first Test, the bowlers have to go back out there and bowl a little bit too soon, because they've not had the rest to then, charge in and do the damage in the second innings. So, well, I'm not too sure whether there's any kind of fractions in the side. The comments from Josh were probably just, just a bit out of turn in terms of the end of day 3. Probably wasn't thinking. I don't think he's in any way, shape or form the kind of person that would want to send that message to the team. But it was something that I'd not heard from an Australian, during a Test match. So that's why we kind of reacted to it. The only way that Australia can put it right is by winning. And that's very simple terms. The batters can only put it right by putting a number on the board. Your job as a batter is to score runs. Your currency is runs, and that's what they have to do in Adelaide. And the bowling attack, I think, if they get runs on the board, and I don't think they need to get like 500s, but if you get 350, 300, I think this bowling attack from Australia is so good. They're going to win more games than not. And it's just about the players performing individually and collectively. Then you start looking at the team, and it always looks that much better, doesn't it? When you win a game, a few people score a few runs, and obviously you hold a few chances, and you play better as individuals, and collectively it looks better for the team. I've always said that in cricket, we talk too much about the team aspect, and this week Australia just got to get the individuals playing to a better standard that they did in Perth. And as I said before, it won't be easy. This Indian side potentially could be strengthened this week. Rohit Sharma will come in. Shubman Gill may play. Ashwin may play for Washington Sundar. And they're a very, very dangerous side, particularly when they start to get confidence. And I think we saw in Perth, they've got that energy and that aggressive nature. And that's the one thing that surprised me, Tommy, in Perth. I thought of the two teams. I know India were on top. India looked a more aggressive team. They looked a little bit more in your face in terms of playing cricket the way that Australia used to play. And Australia just looked like a team that were just going through, not the motions, but they just looked like a nice team to play against. I didn't see any aggression. I didn't see the bouncer theory coming to Yashasvi Jaiswal. I didn't see any kind of confrontation out in the middle. And maybe they missed David Warner in that regard more than his batting, because David sat next to us in the commentary box, and we were looking out in the field, and it was crying out for a little bit of something from Australia. And maybe that's what David Warner brought to them when they were in the field.
Are they a team full of good blokes? And I say that as a positive and a negative. Like, I think we all agree that Pat Cummins as a leader is excellent, and Travis Head and Mitch Marsh are all excellent. They don't have a lot of that mongrel that Australian teams of the past used to have. And then the next question from that, is that an issue? Like, do you need to have that mongrel in order to succeed at Test cricket?
Oh, I don't think you need it. I mean, you're talking about a team that are the world champions. It's the same group of players that went to India and won a World Cup, which.
But they had Warner. They had Warner, though, didn't they? And Warner is that bulldog that was the barometer in many respects.
Yeah, but again, if you look throughout the World Cup, I didn't see too much confrontation. It's the way that Pat likes his team to play. They're not the same Australian side that I was brought up watching and I played against in the early 2000s. They were in your face. Steve Waugh wouldn't even look at you. He wouldn't even say hello in the morning. You're talking about a different generation. This Australian team have had a decent amount of success, but the Test team, if you look at it quite closely over the last few years, you go back to last summer against Pakistan and the West Indies, they weren't on it. They weren't quite the Australian side that we've seen. And the Ashes series a couple of years ago back in the UK, it was 2-2, but if anyone watched that series closely and is a cricket kind of tragic, they'll be very open to admit that England were the better team. Without a question, England were a better side 2 years ago. They didn't get the Ashes, and they made too many mistakes in the first two games. But they played a brand of cricket that looked to me like had Australia on the back foot, and that used to happen the reverse. It used to be that Australia used to batter England and kind of get pushed into a corner. You didn't really know how to act. And I thought Australia, by the end of that series, they're like a boxer on the ropes. The bell came at the right time for Australia in that series. And I'm not saying that England are a great side at all, because England made lots of mistakes and they play some dumb cricket at times, particularly with the batting hand. But I'm just looking at the two kind of sides as a barometer of where they're at. And I just look at this Australian side. I do think they could just. And I'm not saying players can, be unnatural and try and be David Warner when they're not. You've got to be yourselves, and I think this Australian side, the best way that they can play is just be so disciplined and be so kind of on it in the field. Not with verbals, but we would look down at the Test match in Perth and look down at the field, and it just looked at times like they were just a little bit flat. And that's very, very unlike Australia. And that's, this team in particular, who are a wonderful side. But, for this team to, within 2 days of the Test match, look flat in the field, and that's not just me saying it, was a lot of people saying it, that'll be what they'll try and put right in Adelaide. Because if they get that right and they get a bit of buzz and energy, it generally comes from, performing well and getting runs on the board and knowing that you're in the contest. If they can do that and get that buzz right, I think they'll be absolutely fine.
Last one before I let you go. Darren Lehman said last week, Joe Root's a great player, but is he an all-time great? He had 3 goes on the Ashes in Australia, hasn't made 100. He's a rung below Smith, Kohli and Kane Williamson for that reason. Do you agree that Root's a rung below those other 3?
What a load of nonsense! Jeez, we're talking about a player that could quite easily, if he stays fit and that back stays strong, he'll be surpassing Sachin Tendulkar in a few years' time. I mean, just because he's not got 100 here in Australia, this isn't the be all and end all. You'd like to come here and score runs, but he'll come next year, and the way that he's playing and in this England side now, he's back at 4 and just playing the Joe Root way rather than the Bazball way. I've got a sneaky feeling that might come back to haunt Darren next year.
Or you and Buff can go
on. He might get a couple of hundred next year, and the way that England are playing and the way that they play, particularly against this Kookaburra ball, I think in a year's time it's going to be a great contest.
Oh, you and Buff can catch up in Adelaide, and you and I can catch up in Adelaide as well. Look forward to
absolutely
that, and catch you soon. Thanks, Vaughnie.
Cheers, Tom.
My new ball partner who loves bowling down breeze, his name is Bharat Sundaresan. You'll hear him across all the SEN networks. He writes for The Australian, he writes for Crick Buzz. He really is the voice of cricket on these shores and also overseas. He loves travelling around the game, travelling around watching the game globally, and he's been good enough to join us this morning on SEN Mornings. Welcome, Bharat.
Oh, thanks so much, my fellow new ball partner. So I generally go down breeze. Right now I'm going downhill into the city. So I'm just driving towards the Adelaide Oval because Australia resume their team practice sessions today. It's an optional training session. Optional or not, they're never optional for me, Tommy.
And never optional, I imagine, for Marnus Labuschagne. You'll be watching him very closely this morning. What do you expect to see, Baz?
I hope to see him look a lot more positive in the way he moves his feet, the way he moves his hands, and just in his approach to his batting. We saw a clip of him batting in Queensland last week. Crash Craddock was there, keeping a close eye on him. So just on the basis of what I've heard from Crash, it's good to see that, or good to know that Marnus is just, at least for now, thinking about just being more positive with everything he does with his batting. And looking to score runs. I mean, it's albeit in the net sessions, but because someone like Marnus spends so much time in the nets, it's so important that he gets into that psyche, that mindset in practice, so that then he can just kind of translate that into the middle.
Hey, Baz, can we talk about this Indian team? I was up watching the PM's 11 versus India last night. It did have a real practice match vibe to it with batters retiring, and the fact that India batted on after surpassing Australia's score. But Rohit Sharma batted at number 5. Are we a chance to see him at 5 in Adelaide, or will he open, do you think?
No, that's been the million-dollar question, really, because everybody's waiting to see where Rohit bats. And everything changed after that first day was washed off, wasn't it, Tommy, where suddenly you felt like it's technically a 50-over game. How does that count? It was all about batting practice, like you said. It had that practice game vibe to it. But where does, how much do we read into Rohit Sharma not opening the batting? I'm very keen to know. I'm very eager to see what happens once the test match goes up. But Rahul's looked so good with the bat that, will they stick with him as opener? I remember 4 years ago when India played SCG, Virat Kohli was then captain. Chose not to play in that game, and he said a couple of net sessions, and I should be ready. Pujara took the same route out. So I don't know whether it was just Rohit saying, okay, I'll just see how the pink ball goes. It doesn't matter where I bat in this game because I will stick to opening. Or if they've taken a huge call by saying, you know what, Rohit Sharma is better off in the middle order. Not that he's been in the best of form against the new ball anyway.
So Rohit Sharma comes in somewhere in the top 5 or 6 at most. Do you expect Shubman Gill to play as well?
The fact that they put him out there yesterday, and it also helps when he makes runs, that it should tell you that yes, I think Shubman Gill should be available for selection and will be slotted at number 3, would be my guess. So no, positive signs for India again. Like I said at the end of the Perth test, it's like the script is flipped. Last time around, it was India losing players and losing test matches at the start of the series. This time it looks like it's Australia's turn.
And Washington Sundar versus Ravi Ashwin. I mean, Jadeja as well played and had a bowl last night and a bat. It's always a contentious spot, the spinning position for India, isn't it? Especially in conditions where it probably doesn't warrant any more than one spinner. It would be harsh to drop Washington, but do you think either of those other two are a chance to get a gig in Adelaide?
I mean, Ashwin's bowled so well at the Adelaide Oval the last 2 times he's got a chance to play there, Tom, that I think it'd be a little unfair if he misses out. But having taken that huge call in the first test where they played Sundar ahead of both Ashwin and Jadeja, and the fact that he did nothing really to indicate that he wasn't up for the job, I'd be surprised if they would make a change. And someone like Ashwin who loves preparing and preparation as much as, say, Manas does, the fact that he didn't get a bat or a ball yesterday should be, I think, indicative enough that it will be Washington who will play in Adelaide, or they'll stick with him. But you never know with this team. With Gautam Gambhir, we've already seen he loves surprises. Ashwin's record at the Adelaide Oval is really good. He set up the win in 2018 and bowled beautifully last time around. But looks like he'll have to wait his turn this time.
But we're just talking about pink ball cricket for the moment, Baz. And you were suggesting that you've been talking to some people around the game about how significant this format is for the Indians.
No, I was talking about how challenging it is for batters. Like, one of them told me it's like batting in space where the ball seems to have a mind of its own. Or maybe it's just a different visual experience under lights. And also depends on how old the ball is at that point. Because the lacquer goes off, or say it's still the first innings, the ball starts to do all sorts of things. And also maybe because they're not used to it, it's something that they have to get used to on their feet. And I remember Pujara saying that he was the one who very clearly was keen on just dealing with it in the test match rather than overthinking or over-analyzing and coming to assumptions and presumptions before he gets into the battle.
I know you're an Adelaide local now, and the pink ball test is a great event on the calendar. South Australia does it so well. But how have you viewed the way that the Australian public has turned on the Australian team since the Perth test? It was fairly volatile early. Do you think it's calmed down a little bit now?
The culture of outrage that we live in or deal with these days, Tom, it's with everything. But for me, I think it's another. I refer to all of it as a cultural, evolution of me as an Australian in Australia, learning about how things work here. For me, I think it's just an indicator that there are more casual cricket fans in this country than hardcore ones, where they jump to conclusions so quickly and they go from test summer to test summer. So one big defeat and suddenly everything else this team has done gets forgotten. And then that's when you tend to get into those lazy tropes of, they're un-Australian, or there's no intimidation, or, there's something lacking. Why are they being so friendly? Throw everyone out, bring someone new in. And I think that's just, for me, like I said, a window into how there aren't a lot of people who are hooked on to cricket like you and I are for 12 months of the year.
Last one for me. Did the Australian selectors do the right thing playing Scott Boland against India, or would it be better for him and Australia to go into this game with India not having seen him with a pink ball?
That's a great point, and I was thinking about it while I saw Scott Boland bowling to probably the two openers, or if not, if KL Rahul doesn't open, he'll still be in the top order. Two of the three top order batters, and kind of them getting used to spacing Boland with the pink ball. Look, I think the call would have been taken. Obviously, it happened so late where Josh Hazelwood was ruled out. But maybe they could have held him back, Scott Boland, that is. But I think in today's day and age, India have played Test cricket against Scott Boland before. It's not that they don't know what to expect from him. It's not like it was a young Lance Morris, someone they've not seen a lot of before. But but still, it's a glorified next session for KL Rahul and Yashasvi Jaiswal against Boland. And let's see if it comes in handy later this week at the Adelaide Oval.
Baz, love your work. Enjoy training. Make sure you post everything on social media and write about it, because I want to see how Manas and all the guys bat and bowl and how they're looking for the test, which starts on Friday. You and I will be sharing the new ball from 8 to 9 a.m. on Thursday. That's Melbourne time. In Adelaide, that's 7:30 to 8:30. I look forward to catching up with you in a couple of days' time and spending the test with you again.
Well, we'll have a lot of time, Tom. We start very early with the new ball, and then we have a lot of time to kill on the streets of Adelaide.
Love it. This is Baz's hometown in Adelaide now. You are the king of Adelaide, and look forward to seeing your work across the SEN platforms over the summer. That's Bharat Sundaresan, and one man who was a massive fan of Redders from his very early childhood up until a few weeks ago when I believe he called him and has written a beautiful tribute to Ian Redpath on the Cricket et al. Service, is Gideon Haigh. Gideon, welcome to the show, and I appreciate you giving us your time.
Not at all. Always a pleasure to talk about Ian. Nothing like a local hero.
Nothing like a local hero. So you said at the very start of this article, and I think it's a fantastic piece, Gideon, and I got it in my emails yesterday. I was very happy to read it. I've read it again this morning. That Redpath was in many ways Geelong's Test cricketer. What did you mean by that?
Well, you grew up knowing where Ian Redpath was. Redpath Antiques was a kind of a local landmark in Shannon Avenue. You used to drive past it almost every day. And, everyone knew that was where our Test cricketer worked. And it was amazing. It was an amazing idea. I mean, it's an amazing idea now when kind of our Test cricketers live in elite suburbs in huge McMansions and live a life that's very remote from us. But the idea that a Test cricketer dwelt among us was kind of heady. It connected you directly to the Australian Test team. They felt like your genuine representatives. Of course, I grew up in Geelong where the football club was part of the fabric as well. You might be served at the bank by Larry Donoghue, the full forward. You might meet someone selling you a used car who had an association with the Geelong Football Club. Sport and the community were very closely woven in a place like Geelong. We'd had great players before Ian Redpath. We had Lindsay Hassett, former Australian captain. Jack Iverson played Test cricket for Australia. We had Paul Sheehan, who had the loveliest cover drive in cricket, in our view at that time. But something about Redpath's persona, his grit, his determination, his doggedness, his resolute kind of unfashionability really endeared him to the town and to me, who was a kind of a battling young cricketer playing under 12s. The idea that that there was a guy in Shannon Avenue who played Test cricket for Australia was pretty amazing.
You wrote he's as recognisable of his time as David Boone was in the 80s. For someone who didn't see either of those two players play, I find that remarkable. So was he sort of like a cult figure in some ways, or how would you describe his persona and the iconic nature of his presence in the game?
Well, look, he was a cult figure before we had cult figures, in a way. He's a prototype of a cult figure. Nowadays, there'd be memes of Redders, but he lived in a pre-meme age. He was, in those days, cricketers didn't necessarily look like athletes. They didn't spend any time on physical training. Certainly, Ian didn't. His weight remained unchanged for almost his entire life after teenage years, 70 kgs. He was a bean pole. He had this huge protruding Adam's apple. He had the classic Australian jug ears. He had an always unfashionable haircut. He had a moustache briefly, like a lot of cricketers during the 1970s, but it came and went. He looked like someone that you could play club cricket with, and actually someone who you might play club cricket with now. His technique was kind of simple, orthodox. He was a mainly defensive player. He was obviously used in positions like opening in the top three, so he was kind of a batsman who blunted the new ball. There was plenty of great new ball talent around at the time to test him out. And of course, in those players wore caps. So you knew them. They weren't anonymous when they came to the wicket. Didn't have numbers on their backs. You learned to spot them from their gait and their physique and their faces. And Redpath had this incredibly recognisable physiognomy.
Gideon, it's such a great explanation of what made Ian Redpath a cult figure in those times. He was also the last Australian cricketer, as you wrote, to play as an amateur. Can you explain to us what that meant at the time in the mid-1960s?
Well, Red was always regarded this as a bit of a joke, but he played amateur footy in the football season. He played for Geelong Amateurs, and when he was picked for Australia to play in the Melbourne Test match of 1963, he was offered a match fee of £85. But he and his father were worried that they didn't want to jeopardise his playing amateur footy in future, so they declined to accept the fee. Inconveniently, Ian was then selected to play for Australia on the 64 tour of England. And he said, well, you know, I kind of had to do it at that stage. I said, why? He said, well, I would have starved. And, you know, in those days, it was a subsistence life being an Australian Test cricketer. You probably lost out overall financially because you had to take such extensive leave from your job. Ian at that stage was working in the family woolen mill. It was only later that he went into the antique business. He later had to turn down what would have been his last tour of England in 1975 because he was setting his business up and couldn't afford to spend time away. It was hard won to be an Australian Test cricketer in those days. You had to make a lot of sacrifices. Ian made them willingly, very happily, and I think Greg Chappell once said that he knew of two cricketers who would have genuinely killed to play for Australia. One was Rod Marsh and the other was Ian Redpath.
I love that. That's a great compliment to get. What about his post-career? He did some coaching as well, but most of his work was to do with the antiques, wasn't it, in Geelong?
Well, you know, like I said, my mother used him extensively and was always very satisfied with the work. You know, he was a very methodical craftsman, you know, a very easy man to get to know. Never any trouble with Ian. And you could always pop into Redpath Antiques if you wanted to see the Test cricketer who was, you know, in the process of becoming a kind of an antique himself. I remember going in to see him in the mid-1990s when I was writing The Summer Game, my book about Australian cricket in the 50s and 60s. And, you know, he had the radio on. He was working in the back room. He answered my questions while he was busy doing his work because, you know, you couldn't break off in those days. Time was money. And I can remember I had my copy of Always Ready, his autobiography, co-written by Neil Phillipson with me. And I sort of held it up and he said, good fishing book. And it is a good fishing book. There are actually almost as many photos of Ian and his teammates with fish as there are Ian playing cricket.
I love it. I love it so much, Gideon. We really appreciate your work. Your story on Cricket et al. Is absolutely well worth reading. It's a subscription service. Sam Perry's broken some news on it today. Peter Lawler is writing some good stuff. I recommend every cricket fan out there, and people who don't like cricket as much but like reading other stuff, to make sure they subscribe. It's well worth it. And I look forward to seeing you in Adelaide.
Okay, thanks, Tom. See you soon.